You think you know what a man will do to save his land? You have no idea. Silas Boone felt the cold crawl right off the paper and into his bones. The letter was from the government, Fort Keogh, and it carried the scent of ink and endings. Outside, the Montana snow was falling thick and mean, swallowing the world in white. But inside Silas's cabin, the world was shrinking down to a single impossible sentence. Your claim shall be revoked if no eligible family arrangement is legally documented by December 30th, 1888. No lawful spouse, no legal family. No legal family, no land. It was a death sentence for the 1,000 acres he'd bled for. The government wanted families, not ghosts. And Silas, well, he was a ghost haunting his own life. A bachelor, a recluse, a man with a shadow that stretched a little too long and a little too dark. They saw a man alone and figured he was a man who wouldn't fight back. They figured wrong. He shoved the letter in his coat, the paper crinkling like dry leaves. He didn't bother with his coffee. The cold inside him was already worse than anything the winter could throw at him. He saddled his mule, Betsy, and rode through the blizzard, the wind tearing at him like a wild animal. He was headed for the only place a man could get a straight answer and a cup of coffee strong enough to strip paint. He was headed to Hattie Mayfield's. The door to her way station flew open with a gust of snow and fury. Hattie didn't even look up from the pot of beans she was stirring. "Speak of the devil," she grunted. "Silas Boone, you look like you wrestled a snowbank and lost." He slammed the door shut, the sound echoing in the warm, smoky room. "Worse," he growled, his voice rough as gravel. He threw the crumpled letter on the table between them. "They're trying to take it, Hattie." Hattie picked it up, her eyes scanning the official print. She wasn't a woman who startled easy. She'd seen stampedes, floods, and men broken by both. She read the letter, and a slow, grim line formed on her lips. "Knew this was coming," she said, her voice low. "Government's been tightening its grip for months. They want homesteads, not hermitages." "I ain't marrying just for some paper," Silas spat, slumping into a chair. The warmth of the stove felt 100 miles away. "Then you'll be handing your 1,000 acres over to some slick-haired fella from Boston who thinks a cow milks itself," she shot back. She slid a bowl of beans in front of him. It was a gesture that said, "Eat, you fool. You'll need your strength." "What do I do, Hattie? There isn't a woman in Dead Creek who'd have me, and I ain't buying a bride from Billings." Hattie sat down across from him, her gaze steady and sharp. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "There's one," she said. "Came in on last week's coach. Clara Wren, a widow." Silas looked up, a flicker of something in his tired eyes. "A widow? Says her husband was a blacksmith back east. Died of consumption last winter. She's quiet, keeps to herself. Works in my stables harder than any man I've hired. Says she's on her way to Idaho, but she ain't got the money to get there. She's been sleeping in the hayloft, Silas." Hattie leaned back. "Two people with two problems. Sometimes they make one solution." He mulled it over, the steam from the beans rising to meet the scowl on his face. "She know you're shopping her around like she's a prize hog?" Hattie let out a short, sharp laugh. "I ain't shopping nobody. I'm just pointing out that a drowning man shouldn't complain if the rope's a little frayed. Go talk to her. The worst she can do is say no. And then you're no worse off than you are right now." But Silas knew that wasn't true. If she said no, he was worse off. Because then the flicker of hope Hattie had just lit would be gone, and all he'd have left was the cold. That evening, the barn was quiet except for the soft munching of horses and the sigh of the wind outside. Clara Wren was brushing down a mare when the big door creaked open. She turned, expecting Hattie. Instead, she saw him. Silas Boone. He looked like he'd been carved from the mountain itself. Tall, weathered, and carrying the cold of the wilderness in the set of his shoulders. "Miss Wren," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," she answered, her hand tightening on the brush. She didn't look scared. She looked watchful, like a doe that's heard a twig snap in the forest. He stepped inside, pulling off his gloves. "My name's Boone. I own the homestead west of here." "I've heard of it," she said, her voice a low, steady hum. Silas decided right then that Hattie was wrong. There was no use dressing it up. This woman wouldn't appreciate it. I have a proposal for you, he said, his words stark and plain in the quiet barn. I need a wife, on paper. The government is trying to take my land. I'm not asking for your affection. I'm not asking for promises. Just your name on a marriage license. Clara just stared at him. The mare beside her nudged her hand, but she didn't move. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sky, searched his face, looking for something. A lie? A trick? He couldn't tell. Finally, she set the brush down on a hay bale. That's mighty direct of you, Mr. Boone. No use in being otherwise. Shh, he said. She crossed her arms, a simple gesture that was somehow a fortress. And what exactly would I get out of this arrangement? A home, he said simply, a roof that doesn't leak, and a fire that doesn't go out. You'd have your own room, your own space. I'd pay you $50 a month. Come spring, you'll have enough to get to Idaho or anywhere else you please. $50 was a fortune, more than she could make in a year of mucking out stables. She hesitated, and in that hesitation, he saw the flicker of 100 hardships. He saw a woman who was tired of running, tired of being cold, but there was something else there too, a pride that hadn't been broken yet. You don't know me, she said softly. I know you're a hard worker, he countered, and Miss Hattie says you've got no ties. That's all I need to know. I also have no patience for being treated like livestock, she said, her chin lifting just a fraction. He met her gaze, his own unwavering. You'd be doing me a favor, he admitted. A big one. But this is a business deal, Miss Wren, nothing more. It ain't real. It's just a signature to fool a bureaucrat in an office 100 miles away. She looked away from him then, toward the horses in their stalls. The barn was warm, filled with the clean scent of hay and leather. Outside, the wind howled a lonely song. She was thinking. He could almost see the gears turning behind those stormy eyes. She was weighing the hayloft against a real bed, the biting cold against a warm fire, an unknown future against a strange but simple offer. Finally, she looked back at him. Let me think on it, she said. Silas just nodded, a single sharp dip of his head. I'll be at Hattie's till sundown. He turned and walked out, his footsteps crunching in the fresh snow, leaving her alone in the quiet warmth of the barn. He didn't know if she'd say yes. He just knew that if she didn't, the snow would bury him and his homestead by New Year's. And as he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't told her the whole truth. He needed a wife on paper, yes, but he was starting to realize he was hiding a hell of a lot more than just his land. Clara sat by the stove in Hattie's kitchen the next afternoon, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Silas Boone's face. It wasn't a cruel face. It wasn't a desperate one either. It was the face of a man who had made his peace with being alone and was now having that peace torn away from him. He hadn't begged or tried to charm her. He'd laid his cards on the table, plain and simple, and the truth was, her own hand was empty. Her kin in Idaho was a distant cousin she barely remembered. Her money was almost gone. The hayloft was cold and her bones ached with a damp chill that never seemed to leave. She'd known a marriage before, one that was supposed to be real. It had been a cage of cold silence and hot anger, leaving her with bruises on her skin and scars on her soul. This was different. This wasn't a cage. It was a key to a warm room, a full belly, and a path out of this frozen-over purgatory. Hattie came in, brushing snow from her shawl. Well? She asked, her eyes sharp. Clara looked up from her cold coffee, her decision made. Tell him yes, she said, her voice quiet but firm. That evening felt less like a wedding and more like the signing of a treaty. Silas showed up in a clean black coat, his jaw set and his eyes fixed on some distant point over her shoulder. Clara wore her only good dress, a faded blue calico. She'd pulled her hair back, neat and tight. They stood in Hattie's parlor, the only light coming from an oil lamp that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. Preacher Wendell, old and half-deaf, performed the ceremony. His voice cracked and wheezed, stumbling over the words as if they were rocks in a field. We gather, not for love, he mumbled, squinting at his Bible, but for shelter and provision and the law. It was the most honest sermon Silas had ever heard. When it was his turn, he said, "I do," with the flat finality of a man closing a deal. When it was hers, Clara looked directly into Silas's eyes, her own gaze clear and steady. "I do," she said. Her voice didn't waver. There were no rings, no flowers, no celebration, just Hattie wiping a tear from her eye in the corner and the preacher muttering, "By law of man in the Montana Territory, you are joined." And just like that, it was done. Clara Wren was now Clara Boone, a name she'd wear like a borrowed coat. They walked out into the swirling snow, the silence between them as thick as the drifts. Silas helped her onto the buckboard, his touch brief and impersonal. "Stove's running at the house," he said, taking the reins. "Should be warm when we get there." "I don't expect a welcome," she replied softly, staring straight ahead into the white abyss. "You'll have heat, and a bed, and food, Mao," he said. "It's what was promised." The ride was a quiet, frozen eternity. The homestead emerged from the flurries like a ghost ship, a dark timber frame against the endless white, a thin curl of smoke rising from its chimney like a final, lonely breath. It wasn't a pretty place. It was sturdy. It was built to endure, just like the man sitting beside her. He helped her down and led her inside. The warmth hit her first, a physical thing, a blanket after a long, cold swim. A fire roared in a massive stone hearth. The main room was clean, practical, boots lined up by the door, no clutter, no softness. It was the home of a man who didn't live in his house so much as occupy it. "This is the parlor," he said, his voice echoing slightly. "Kitchen's through there. Your room is upstairs, west side. Mine's at the end of the hall. We won't be in each other's way." "That was the deal," she confirmed, her eyes taking in every detail. "I won't interfere with your doings. You'll be paid on the first of the month. Your name is on the claim now. Clara Boone." He finally looked at her, his eyes unreadable as a frozen river. "That's the shape of it." Clara met his gaze without flinching. "And what shape do you expect me to take?" He considered her for a long moment. "Whatever shape is yours," he said simply. She didn't know what to make of that. She took off her gloves and set them on the hearth. Her room was just as he'd promised. Clean, warm, with a thick quilt on the bed and a small window looking out at the snow-drowned world. There on the bedside table was a small leather-bound book. She picked it up. It wasn't a Bible. It was a book of poetry, and tucked inside was a tarnished silver locket. Her fingers, still numb from the cold, fumbled with the clasp. It snapped open. Inside wasn't a portrait. It was a tiny, intricately folded piece of paper. She carefully unfolded it. It wasn't a note. It was a map, a crude, hand-drawn map of the Boone homestead. But there was one spot, a cluster of pines north of the barn, circled over and over again in faded ink. Beside it were two letters, scrawled in a different hand. E.B. She snapped the locket shut, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. This wasn't just a marriage of convenience. This house wasn't just empty. It was haunted. And Silas Boone had brought her right into the middle of his ghost story without telling her the most important part. He hadn't just been a bachelor. He'd been a husband before. The days that followed were a silent, careful dance. Clara created a routine, a wall of chores to hide behind. She rose before dawn, started the kitchen stove, and had coffee brewed by the time Silas came downstairs. They moved around each other like ghosts, their conversations limited to "pass the salt" or "more wood for the fire." He was true to his word. He kept his distance. He'd spend his days out on the range, checking fences in the biting wind, and return after dusk, his face etched with a weariness that went bone deep. Clara didn't mind the quiet. Silence was a relief after the shouting she had known. But this house had a different kind of silence, a heavy, listening kind of silence, and it was full of secrets. She kept finding them. In a dusty corner of the parlor bookshelf, tucked behind old almanacs, she found another book, a ledger. Most of it was farm accounts, the price of feed, the sale of a calf. But the last few pages were different. They were filled with a sharp, slanted handwriting, not numbers, but names. Lists of them. And next to each name, a date and a single word. Paid. What was he paying for? Silence? Work? Something else? Then one afternoon she found the lock cabinet in the hallway. The key was gone, but the lock was old and simple. A butter knife from the kitchen was all it took. Her hands trembled as she pried it open. Inside was a small wooden box. She lifted the lid. There it was. A marriage license, yellowed with age, dated 5 years prior. Silas E. Boone and Eleanor M. Bright. So E.B. was Eleanor Bright, his first wife, the woman from the locket map. What had happened to her? That night, a monster of a storm rolled in, rattling the windows and screaming down the chimney. Clara sat at the kitchen table, trying to mend a tear in her dress, but her mind was miles away, lost in the mystery of Eleanor Boone. The front door burst open close to midnight, bringing the storm inside with it. Silas stumbled in, covered in snow, a half-empty bottle of rye whiskey clutched in his fist. He was drunk, not just tipsy, but staggering, lost in the bottle drunk. "Where have you been?" Clara gasped, jumping to her feet. He didn't answer. He just looked at her, his eyes glazed and haunted. "You ever look at someone," he slurred, swaying on his feet, "and wonder what they see when they look back? The man you are, or the man you used to be?" She moved toward him, grabbing his arm to steady him. He was freezing. "You need to sit down before you fall down." He shook his head, pulling away. "No. No sitting?" He squinted at her, his gaze unfocused. "You're not afraid of me?" he whispered. It was a statement, not a question. "Why should I be?" "I don't know," he mumbled, his voice thick with a sorrow so deep it seemed to swallow the room. "Depends on what you've heard." He leaned heavily against the table. "They all think I did it. Her brothers, the sheriff, the whole damn town." "Did what, Silas?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked right through her then, his eyes fixed on a ghost only he could see. "I didn't kill her," he muttered, the words a raw, broken confession. "I never laid a hand on her, but I buried her. Oh, I buried her all right, right where she told me to." He let out a choked, desperate laugh. "But the thing about the truth, it don't stay buried." His legs gave out then. He crumpled to the floor, the bottle slipping from his fingers and rolling across the floorboards. In moments, he was fast asleep, lost in a drunken stupor. Clara stood frozen, the half-mended dress clutched in her hands. Her heart pounded like a drum. "I buried her right where she told me to." The circled spot on the map, the cluster of pines. He wasn't talking about a body. He was talking about something else, a secret, something Eleanor had made him promise to hide. She dragged him to the sofa by the fire, pulled off his frozen boots, and covered him with a blanket. In his sleep, with the scowl gone, he looked younger, more vulnerable. She noticed a series of old faint scars on his left wrist, white lines against his skin. These weren't the marks of a rancher. They were the marks of a man who had once tried to escape his own life. Who was Eleanor Bright? And what secret was she hiding that was so terrible it had driven Silas to this? Clara had married a stranger to solve a simple problem, but she was beginning to suspect she hadn't solved anything. She just walked into the heart of a much, much bigger one. At dawn, Clara was still sitting in the rocker by the dying fire, stiff and cold. Silas was stirring on the couch, groaning as he sat up, pressing the heels of his hands into his temples. "You're loud when you drink," she said, her voice flat. She handed him a wet cloth. He took it without a word, pressing it to his forehead. "I don't remember all of it," he mumbled, not looking at her. "Then I won't remind you." He finally looked at her, his eyes clouded with guilt. "You could have left," he said quietly. "Could have walked right out that door." "I thought about it," she admitted, "but the storm was bad, and you're heavier than you look." A small, wry joke. It wasn't much, but it was better than the suffocating silence. Later that day, the storm had passed. The sun was out, glittering on the fresh snow with a painful brightness. Clara was feeding the chickens when she saw a rider approaching. He wasn't from Dead Creek. He wore a city coat and rode a fine chestnut horse, moving with an easy confidence that set her teeth on edge. He dismounted at the porch. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat, Name's Vickers. I'm a reporter out of Helena. Clara's stomach tightened. What brings you all the way out here, Mr. Vickers? His eyes weren't friendly. They were sharp, probing, taking in the house, the barn, the whole layout of the homestead. Following up on an old story, he said, his smile thin and unpleasant. A missing persons case from a few years back. Woman by the name of Eleanor Bright. Or Eleanor Boone, I should say. Some folks think her husband buried her somewhere out on this property. Every nerve in Clara's body went on high alert. This wasn't a reporter. Reporters ask questions about people. This man was asking questions about land. She's not here, Clara said, her voice hard as ice. She left, years ago. Vickers raised an eyebrow. Is that so? And you would be... I'm Mrs. Boone, she said, dropping the words like stones. The lie felt surprisingly solid, a shield she could hold up against this man's prying gaze. That made him blink. Well now, he said, drawing the word out. That is news. Silas Boone, remarried. He looked her up and down, a flicker of something she couldn't quite read in his eyes. Annoyance? And you're certain about Mrs. Bright? No chance she's still around? The only thing buried on this property, Mr. Vickers, is the past, she said, her hand tightening on the doorknob. There's no story for you here. He held her gaze for a long moment, then tipped his hat again. A pleasure, Mrs. Boone. He mounted his horse and rode off, not looking back. Clara stayed on the porch until he was just a black speck against the snow. He wasn't a reporter. She knew it in her gut. He was a hunter, and he hadn't come here looking for a body. He'd come looking for whatever secret Eleanor had buried. That night she confronted Silas. She found him in the barn, sharpening an axe, the rhythmic scrape of steel on stone filling the cold air. A man was here today, she said, skipping any preamble. Said he was a reporter. Vickers. He was asking about Eleanor. The grinding noise stopped. Silas looked up, his knuckles white on the axe handle. What did you tell him? I told him I was Mrs. Boone, she said, and that Eleanor was long gone. He stared at her, his expression unreadable in the flickering lantern light. You didn't have to do that. He wasn't a reporter, Silas. He was looking for something. Something he thought you had. She took a breath. Your drunken confession the other night. You said you buried her where she told you to. You weren't talking about a body, were you? He set the axe down carefully. He walked over to a dark corner of the barn, to an old, forgotten horse stall. He kicked aside some loose hay, revealing a section of loose floorboards. He pried them up. Underneath was a small, locked iron box. He pulled a key from his pocket and opened it. He reached inside and pulled out a thick, leather-bound journal. He handed it to her. This, he said, his voice raspy with emotion. This is what I buried. Clara opened it. The pages were filled with Eleanor's sharp, slanted handwriting. But it wasn't a diary. It was filled with drawings of rock formations, notes on soil composition, and detailed geological surveys. It was the work of a prospector. The last page contained a hand-drawn map, the same one from the locket. But this one was more detailed. The circled area wasn't just a cluster of pines. It was marked, main lode, high-grade silver ore. Clara looked up at Silas, her mind reeling. The land, she whispered. It's not just land. Her father was a geologist, Silas explained, his voice hollow. He surveyed this whole valley before the settlers came. He knew. The Bright family knew. They sent Eleanor to marry me, to get her name on the claim so they could take it all. But what happened? I fell in love with her, he said, and the simple words were filled with a world of pain. And I think she started to feel something for me too. She was torn between me and her family. She saw their greed. She saw what it was doing to her brother, Jedediah. He was obsessed. He threatened her, threatened me. He pointed to the journal in her hands. She gave me this. She told me to hide it. She said it was a curse. She made me swear I'd never tell anyone, never dig it up. She said the silver would destroy me just like it was destroying her family. And then she left. Sent a letter from Cheyenne. Said she couldn't live with the lies anymore. I never heard from her again. Her family, Clara breathed. They started the rumor you killed her. Of course they did, he said bitterly. It was the perfect way to get me off the land. If I was a murderer, the government would revoke my claim. They've been trying to find a way to break me ever since, sending men like Vickers to sniff around, hoping I'd slip up. Suddenly, it all clicked into place. The government letter wasn't a random bureaucratic act. The Bright family had friends in the territorial office. They had pushed for this. They had created the no-spouse rule, knowing it was a trap Silas couldn't escape. They were making their final move, and Clara had just announced to their man, Vickers, that the trap had failed. She had called herself Mrs. Boone. She looked from the journal in her hands to the haunted face of the man in front of her. She had come here for a roof over her head, for $50 a month, a simple business deal. But it wasn't simple anymore. She had just declared war on the Bright family, and she'd done it using Silas Boone's name. The air in the cabin grew thick with unspoken things. Silas had shared his secret, and in doing so, had handed Clara a weapon that could destroy him. She held Eleanor's journal, the proof of a silver lode so rich it could make kings out of paupers and devils out of men. She could take this journal, ride to Helena, and expose the Bright family. She could also expose Silas, making a claim on the silver herself as his legal wife. The thought was a cold, slithering snake in her mind. But when she looked at Silas, she didn't see a business partner. She saw a man who had been slowly bled dry by secrets and lies. A man who had been protecting a dead woman's wish at the cost of his own life. "They won't stop," she said, her voice quiet but certain. "Vickers will go back and tell Jedediah Bright that you've remarried, that their plan failed. They'll get more aggressive." "Let them try," Silas growled, his hands clenching into fists. "We can't just wait for them to act, Silas. We have to be smarter." She tapped the journal. "This is our proof, but it's her word against her family's. We need more." An idea began to form in her mind, a risky, desperate gamble. "My husband," she began, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "The blacksmith." That wasn't the whole truth. He wasn't a blacksmith. He was a Pinkerton agent. Silas stared at her, his face a mask of stone. "He wasn't a good man," she continued, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "He was greedy and cruel. He took jobs for money, nothing else. He heard rumors about the Boone homestead, about a missing wife, and a possible fortune. He took me with him to Dead Creek under the guise of looking for work. His plan was to investigate, to find out what really happened to Eleanor, and to blackmail whoever was responsible." "He was investigating me," Silas said, his voice flat. "He was investigating everyone," she corrected. "You, the Brights, the whole situation." He didn't believe the murder story. He thought it was about money. He died before he could find anything. A fall from a horse. I was left with nothing. That's the real reason I was sleeping in Hattie's hayloft. She had laid her own ugly truth on the table, a counterweight to his. The silence stretched, thin and fragile. She expected him to be angry, to throw her out. He had married a woman who was, in a way, the widow of his enemy. But instead, he just nodded slowly. "We've all got ghosts, Clara." It was an absolution, a truce. "My husband taught me things," she went on, her confidence growing. "How to watch people, how to see what they're trying to hide. Vickers isn't just a thug. He's smart. He's looking for this journal, or for the mine itself. So we're going to give him what he's looking for." She opened the journal to the map. "We're going to make a copy of this map, a fake one. It will lead him to the other side of the property, to that worthless ravine near the western ridge. While he and the Brights are digging in the snow for nothing, you and I are going to find the real mine." It was a crazy plan. It was dangerous. But it was better than waiting for the wolf to come to the door. For the next 2 days they worked. Clara, with her surprisingly steady hand, copied Eleanor's map onto a fresh piece of parchment, aging it with coffee grounds and candle smoke until it looked like it had been hidden for years. She made one crucial change, shifting the location of the mine to the barren western ravine. Meanwhile, Silas rode to a neighboring homestead, miles away, and paid the farmer's son to ride to the telegraph office in the next town. He sent a coded message, one that would look like a simple farm supply order to anyone watching. But Hattie Mayfield would understand. "The winter stock is low. Expecting hungry visitors soon. Keep the sheriff warm." The night they were ready, the air was still and freezing, the sky a canopy of brilliant cold stars. It was time to set the bait. "I'll ride into Dead Creek," Clara said, pulling on her thickest coat. "I'll go to the saloon. I'll have one drink, and I'll make sure the wrong people see me pay for it with a silver coin. One of the old ones from your mother's sewing box. Then I'll accidentally drop this map." "It's too dangerous," Silas argued. "Vickers, or one of his men, will be watching the town." "That's the point," she said. "They need to believe I'm greedy and foolish, that I found the map and I'm getting ready to run. They'll think I'm betraying you. It's the only way they'll believe it's real." He looked at her, his face a mixture of fear and a grudging respect. He saw the strength in her, the same hard, enduring strength he saw in the mountains around them. "Be careful," he said, his voice low. "I'm always careful," she replied. She mounted her horse, the fake map tucked securely in her pocket. As she rode away from the homestead, leaving Silas alone in the vast, silent darkness, she knew this was more than just a trick. It was a test of their fragile alliance, and a gamble that could get them both killed. Because if the Brights took the bait, their fury when they found out they'd been tricked would be a storm that neither of them might survive. The saloon in Dead Creek was a pit of warm, sour air, smelling of stale beer, wet wool, and desperation. Clara slid onto a stool at the far end of the bar, keeping her head down, trying to look like a woman on the edge. She ordered a whiskey. Her eyes scanned the room in the grimy mirror behind the bar. There, in the corner, nursing a beer, was a man she'd seen talking to Vickers a few days before. The hook was in the water. She took a slow sip of the burning liquid, letting the warmth spread through her chest. After a few minutes, she signaled the bartender. She pulled a small cloth pouch from her dress. With deliberately clumsy fingers, she fumbled it, letting a few coins spill onto the bar. One of them was the old, heavy silver dollar. The man in the corner sat up straighter, his eyes locked onto the coin. Clara paid for her drink, then gathered her things to leave. As she stood up, she let the folded parchment map slip from her pocket and fall to the floor near her stool. She didn't look back. She walked steadily out of the saloon, her heart hammering against her ribs. She counted her steps. 1, 2, 3. She heard the scrape of a chair behind her. 4, 5. She was out the door, back in the biting cold. She didn't run. She walked calmly to her horse, mounted, and rode out of town, heading not towards the homestead, but south on the trail towards Billings. She had to make them think she was running for good. She'd circle back through the woods under the cover of darkness. The bait was set. Now she could only pray they took it. Back at the homestead, Silas was working by lantern light. He wasn't waiting. He was following the real map, the one from Eleanor's journal. It led him north of the barn, into a thick stand of old-growth pines where the snow lay deep and undisturbed. The map was precise. Pace 30 steps from the split rock boulder, due west. Look for the lightning-scarred pine. He found the tree, a towering giant with a silver streak running down its trunk. The journal said the entrance was concealed at the base, beneath a tangle of ancient roots. He dug for an hour, the cold biting at his fingers. The only sounds the scrape of his shovel and his own ragged breath. Finally, his shovel hit something that wasn't frozen earth. Wood. He cleared the snow away, revealing a low, heavy door made of thick timbers, hidden beneath the roots. It was braced with rusted iron. There was no handle, but he found the seam and pried it open with the head of his axe. The door groaned in protest, releasing a gust of stale, cold air that smelled of stone and deep earth. He lit a fresh lantern and stepped inside. It wasn't a natural cave. It was a mine shaft. The walls were rough-hewn, but the timbers bracing the ceiling were expertly placed. Eleanor's father had been here. He'd built this test mine to gauge the richness of the vein without drawing attention. Silas walked deeper, the lantern light dancing off the walls. And then he saw it, a shimmering metallic vein, as thick as his arm, running through the solid rock. It glittered and shone, a river of frozen moonlight. Silver. More than he had ever imagined. A fortune that could change everything. He reached out and touched the cold, solid metal. This was the secret that had torn a family apart. The secret that had cost him his first wife and nearly his land. He felt no joy, No greed, only a profound, aching sadness. It was then that he heard it, a crunch of snow from outside the mine entrance. He froze, dousing his lantern instantly, plunging the mine into absolute blackness. He drew the pistol he always carried tucked in his belt, his ears straining in the sudden, terrifying silence. It wasn't Clara. Her horse was a miles away. "I know you're in there, Boone," a voice echoed from the entrance. A familiar, chilling voice. Vickers. "Your new wife is quite the talker, but she's not as smart as she thinks she is." Silas's blood ran cold. The fake map. It hadn't been a trick. It had been a trap. For him. "Jedediah Bright sends his regards," Vickers continued, his voice dripping with menace. "He's tired of waiting. We know about the mine. We've always known roughly where it was. Your little charade just helped us pinpoint it." A second figure appeared at the entrance, a silhouette against the snowy landscape. Taller, broader, Jedediah Bright himself. "Come on out, Boone," Jedediah's voice boomed. "The land is ours now. The silver is ours. And just to make sure there are no more complications, we're going to bury you in it. A fitting end, don't you think? Right next to my sister." Silas's mind raced. They thought Eleanor was buried here. They were wrong about that, but they were right about everything else. He was trapped, one man against two, in a dark hole in the ground. The fake map hadn't been bait for them. It had been bait for him. They'd let Clara escape knowing she'd lead them right to the prize. Or worse, they had her. He was alone. He was outgunned. And the walls of his silver-laced tomb were closing in. Clara galloped through the frozen woods, her horse's breath pluming in the frigid air. The plan had felt wrong the moment she left the saloon. Too easy. The man in the corner had been too obvious. The way he'd scooped up the map, too theatrical. Her husband, the Pinkerton, had taught her one vital lesson. When a mark wants you to see them, it's because they want you to look away from something else. They hadn't followed her. She'd circled back, hidden in the trees overlooking the trail south, and waited. Nothing. No riders. No pursuit. Which meant they weren't interested in her. They were interested in what she'd left behind. Silas. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She spurred her horse, pushing it harder, racing back towards the homestead. The fake map was a diversion, but not in the way she'd planned. It was to make Silas think they were on a wild goose chase, to make him feel safe enough to go looking for the real mine. They'd been playing him from the start. She burst through the trees into the clearing of the homestead just in time to see it. Two horses tethered near the barn, a faint trail of footprints leading into the northern pines, and a cold, terrifying silence where there should have been light and life. She dismounted, grabbing the rifle from its scabbard on her saddle. She crept forward, following the tracks in the snow. They led her straight to the lightning-scarred pine and to the gaping dark maw of the uncovered mine entrance. She heard voices from within, faint and muffled. "A fitting end, don't you think? Right next to my sister," a booming voice echoed from the depths. Clara's heart stopped. They had him cornered. She was alone. The sheriff was miles away, waiting for a signal that would never come. It was up to her. She thought about her options. She could run, ride to Hattie's, get the sheriff, and come back. But by then, it would be too late. Silas would be dead. Or she could create a diversion, a fire, something to draw them out. No, they'd just kill him and leave. There was only one choice, the one her husband would have taken, the direct approach, the one that would likely get her killed. She took a deep breath, the icy air burning her lungs. She raised the rifle to her shoulder, cocked the hammer, and stepped into the darkness of the mine. "Drop your weapons," she called out, her voice hard and steady, echoing off the stone walls. "Or the next sound you hear will be your skulls cracking open." Down the tunnel, two figures turned in surprise. Vickers and a larger man she assumed was Jedediah Bright. They had Silas backed against a wall, his own pistol aimed at them in a desperate standoff. The flickering lantern light cast monstrous shadows. Jedediah laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Well, look what the cat dragged in. The blushing bride. Come to die with your new husband?" "I've come to offer you a deal," Clara said. taking a slow step forward, the rifle never wavering. "We're not making deals," Vickers snarled, raising his pistol to aim at her. "You will," Clara said, her voice dropping, laced with venom. "Because I know the truth, Jedediah. All of it. I know Eleanor is alive. I know she's in a sanitarium outside Denver, put there by you, her loving brother, to keep her quiet. I know you've been draining her inheritance to fund your search for this mine." The smirk vanished from Jedediah's face. He took a step back, his eyes wide with shock. How could you know that?" "My name isn't Boone," she said, letting the lie fall away. "It's Wren. My husband was James Wren, a Pinkerton agent. He was hired by your sister's lawyer, the one man you didn't manage to buy or threaten. James was investigating you when he died, but he sent all his findings back to his office first. The whole story, the forged committal papers, the threats, the secret mine. It was a bluff, a spectacular life-or-death lie. James had found nothing but rumors, but Jedediah didn't know that. The Pinkerton National Detective Agency knows everything," she pressed on, the lie growing stronger, more real with every word. "And they know I'm here. If I'm not back in Dead Creek by sunrise, they will send a dozen agents. They will tear this valley apart. They won't just take the mine, Jedediah. They will see you hang for what you did to your sister." Silence. The only sound was the drip of water somewhere in the dark. Jedediah and Vickers exchanged a panicked look. They believed her. The fear of the Pinkertons was a powerful thing. "What do you want?" Jedediah finally whispered, his voice hoarse. "You're going to walk out of this mine," Clara commanded. "You're going to get on your horses, and you're going to ride out of this territory. You will sign over any claim you have to Eleanor's name. You will never contact her, and you will never come back here. If you do, the Pinkertons will hunt you to the ends of the earth." Suddenly Silas moved. While they were distracted by Clara, he had edged along the wall. In one swift motion, he lunged forward, not at Jedediah, but at the lantern, smashing it against the rock wall. The mine was plunged into absolute suffocating darkness. Gunshots exploded in the confined space, deafening and chaotic. Muzzle flashes lit the tunnel in brief, terrifying strobes. Clara dropped to the ground, crawling blindly away from the noise. She heard a man scream in pain, a heavy thud, the sound of a struggle. Then silence, a ringing, terrifying silence. "Clara!" It was Silas's voice, ragged and close. "I'm here," she whispered back, her whole body trembling. A match scraped against stone, and a tiny flame flickered to life. In its light, she saw the scene. Vickers was on the ground, clutching a bloody leg, his gun just out of reach. Jedediah Bright was slumped against the wall, unconscious, a fresh bruise swelling on his temple. And Silas stood over them, pistol in hand, his face grim but resolute. He looked at her, his eyes finding hers in the flickering matchlight. "The Pinkertons?" he asked, a hint of a disbelieving smile touching his lips. Clara let out a shaky breath. "Sometimes," she said, "a good story is better than a good aim." He knelt beside her in the darkness, the match burning down to his fingertips before he dropped it. But in that brief moment of light, she saw it in his eyes. Gratitude, awe, and something else. Something that felt, for the first time, like it might not be a lie. Something that felt real. They dragged Jedediah and the wounded Vickers out of the mine and tied them up in the barn. As the first pale light of dawn touched the snow-covered peaks, another rider appeared. It was the sheriff, a grizzled old man with tired eyes, and Hattie Mayfield was riding beside him, a shotgun resting across her lap. "Got your message, Silas," Hattie said, her eyes taking in the scene with grim satisfaction. "Figured we'd come see about those hungry visitors." The story spilled out. Not Clara's bluff about the Pinkertons, but the real story. Silas showed the sheriff Eleanor's journal. He told them about the coercion, the threats, the silver. Vickers, groaning in pain and fearing the wrath of the Bright family, less than a hangman's noose, corroborated the whole thing. He confessed to being hired by Jedediah to intimidate Silas off the land. By noon, the whole sordid affair was over. Jedediah, now awake and sullen, was hauled off to the federal jail in Helena, along with Vickers. The sheriff put a wire out to the authorities in Denver, telling them to check on the sanitarium where Eleanor was being held. The Bright family's reign was over. As the sheriff's wagon disappeared down the trail, two more men arrived. The officials from the land office come to serve the eviction notice. They walked up to the porch, their faces stern and bureaucratic. Silas met them, Clara standing beside him. He didn't look like a man about to lose his home. He looked like a king standing on his own battlements. "Mr. Boone," the first man said, pulling out a ledger, "we are here regarding your claim. As you have failed to document an eligible family arrangement—" "There must be some mistake," Silas interrupted, his voice calm and steady. He reached out and took Clara's hand. Her hand was small in his, but it felt as solid as the mountain. "This is my wife, Clara Boone." The official blinked, looking from Silas to Clara, then back again. "We were informed that you were a bachelor." "Information was wrong," Silas said simply. The official, flustered, looked at his partner. The sheriff had just hauled a major criminal off this very land. The story was already spreading. This quiet, reclusive homesteader was now a local hero. The optics of evicting him were suddenly very, very bad. He cleared his throat. "I see. Well, ahem. As long as everything is in order." He made a hasty note in his ledger. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Boone. You'll retain the full claim." He couldn't get off the property fast enough. When they were gone, a profound silence settled over the homestead. It wasn't the heavy, secret-filled silence of before. It was a clean, quiet peace. They stood on the porch hand in hand, looking out at the vast white expanse of their land. It was finally, truly theirs. "You know," Clara said softly, "that $50 a month you promised me. I don't think that's going to be enough." Silas turned to her, a slow smile spreading across his face, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed him. "No? No," she said, her own lips curving into a smile. "I'm thinking I'll want a share of that silver mine. A partnership." "A partnership," he repeated, his voice low. He stepped closer, his other hand coming up to gently cup her face. "Clara, what you did in there, you saved my life." "You saved mine first," she whispered. "You gave me a home when I didn't have one." "It wasn't a home," he said, his eyes searching hers. "Not until you got here." He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of necessity or a part of a bargain. It was slow and deep and real, a kiss that spoke of shared battles and silent understanding, a kiss that melted away the last of the winter chill between them. It was the start of something new, something that wasn't built on lies or secrets, but on the hard, solid ground they had fought for and won, together. Spring came late that year, but when it did, it came with a fierce, vibrant life that seemed determined to make up for the long, hard winter. The snow melted, revealing rich earth. Green shoots pushed their way toward the sun, and inside the sturdy timber house, a new life was beginning too. One morning, Clara fainted while weeding the small garden she had planted. When she woke up, she was on the sofa, with a panicked Silas hovering over her. A trip to the doctor in town confirmed what she already suspected. She was pregnant. That night, they sat on the porch swing, watching the stars prick the deep velvet of the sky. Clara rested her head on his shoulder, his arm wrapped securely around her. "Do you remember the first thing you said to me?" she murmured. "I said a lot of foolish things." He chuckled. "You said it wasn't real," she clarified. "Just a name on a piece of paper." He was quiet for a long time. Then he turned, his lips brushing her temple. "I was wrong," he whispered. Us, it's the only real thing I have." Silas Boone had fought for his land, but in the end, he had won so much more. He had found a treasure far richer than silver, buried not in the cold, dark earth, but in the heart of a woman who had walked out of a snowstorm and into his life. A woman who had been a stranger, then a bargain, then a partner. And now she was his home. What started as a lie to fool the government had become the deepest truth of their lives. And they were just getting started. If you enjoyed this story of secrets and survival in the Old West, be sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You never know what other buried truths we'll uncover next.